Right, now it is time for this week's Talking Points. Right, this might require a little bit of explanation. The first talking point here, Dunne-Frost. This pertains to Robbie Dunne and Bryony Frost and the article that David Walsh has written in today's Sunday Times, which is emblazoned across 2 pages of the sports section. In the first page you can see there a culture in which threatening behaviour is condoned. Robbie Dunne denies Bryony Frost claims, but case report maintains he's bullied and harassed her over a prolonged period. Investigation highlights lax weighing room ethos, which stopped it from gathering detailed evidence. The report was submitted in April. It runs to 120 pages, but British Horse Racing Authority won't comment on next steps. And the report was compiled under the auspices of Chris Watts, who was then the head of integrity at the British Horse Racing Authority, who formally interviewed Robbie Dunne at Warwick Racecourse and sought to formally interview a number of people in the weighing room, both jockeys and valets. And this was based on a series of allegations that were made by Bryony Frost of systematic intimidation and bullying over a period of several months and several rides, which a charge which Robbie Dunne, as you heard there, denies. So it's very serious implications for racing. There's many questions to answer. The first of which, Richard, is why this has taken so long to get here, and secondly, why has this been leaked to the Sunday Times and by who and to what end?
Yeah, difficulty with discussing this with any certainty is a lot of it is hearsay, a lot of it is supposition, and obviously it's an ongoing case where we're not privy, other than what we've read today, to what the detailed evidence has been so far. In terms of who leaked it, that is quite interesting because obviously there have been changes within the BHA recently, so it could be in either of their favour, the person who left or the BHA themselves, to try and explain, if it was going to come out, why it has taken so long. Legal reasons are why I believe it has been so slow in its movement through the system, because you do have to dot every I and cross every T when it's going to be examined in a court of law. As regards the actual case itself, it refers to a couple of incidents which I looked at last night, because at least I'm qualified to look at it, and neither were major in terms of what you would look at. They're less than the Frankie Dettori incident, there are more when we just looked at. Ongoing feuds within the weighing room, I'm sure, are relatively, not common, but are not unknown. The difficulty where I have is when these become ongoing and out of proportion rather than an isolated incident which is just venting your spleen in the weighing room. Yeah. Difficult. The culture aspect, culture is changing throughout life. Maybe some of the cultures in the weighing room, separate changing rooms, etc., referred to there of, being indiscreet, etc. I don't know. It's a very thorny one, but it will potentially rock racing because it's very difficult in this day and age to paint yourself other than 100% squeaky clean in these sorts of incidents.
Yeah, there's 2 layers to this. The first layer is the individual antipathy that has been reported, more than that, antagonism from one jockey to another, and a mutual antipathy between the pair. There is the issue of whether what goes on in the weighing room should stay in the weighing room, which on one level you could see is a reasonable point if it's just a one-off after a race, heat of the moment exchange of words. But if there is evidence of systematic harassment or bullying, then it goes into a completely different area, and particularly when it's between genders and the issue of misogyny is raised.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, based on this sort of framework, to work out who's to blame, who's to what. The implications are serious, the headlines, maybe that the story has been slightly blown out of proportion, but charges have been brought, and so as a result it is something we will be hearing more of, and we can't really unfortunately do justice in 2 minutes and a half. But just finally, within the weighing room, you ride against each other at speed, particularly over jumps. You must know where the lines are. It always reminds me of Formula One. Hamilton and Verstappen have a coming together at 200 miles an hour. You do, within yourselves, have to say, you crossed the line there, Nick, and you crossed the line. We don't know yet whether any lines were crossed. Out on the track, the instance, they weren't. Behaviour-wise is a completely different ballgame, but getting people to come forward to support evidence is going to be very, very difficult based on previous similar incidents.
Yeah, and the idea that there is some kind of omerta here is quite a worrying one. If somebody does have a genuine concern and they are fearful of going about their daily business because there is a code of silence, then that poses the sport a significant problem.
Absolutely. And, the culture within, say, not just racing, but within life has changed markedly in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And you do need to make sure that your protocols are in line with the times, even if that is quite an uncomfortable ride.
And just finally, I mean, if I were the BHA, and they might think different, but I'd be smarting at the fact that this is now dominating.
Morning after Champions Day. Yeah.
Morning after Champions Day. And second, you'd be thinking, well, to what extent is a leak of this detail going to prejudice a future hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very difficult. Becomes difficult now, I would have thought. Again, not impossible, but difficult.
But legally, there are plenty of loopholes that you can jump through. And the more loopholes you provide, or the more ammunition you provide to both sides to suggest their case was prejudiced by it being brought out into the open, makes it more legally complex. Right, we haven't got much minutes for the rest of them, have we?
No, we haven't, but I make no apology for that.
No, absolutely.
This is going to be a key story that is going to
absolutely.
Continue.
Now it's out in the open that you and I were scrabbling around. You were sending me copies last night. I was looking at the races. That's what most of the racing journalists will be doing now, because obviously you've been caught offside by a scoop from one individual paper. The pressure will be on for others to now repeat that story during the course of the next week, particularly in the trade papers, and they will all be making phone calls, and it begins to snowball. So yes, you're quite right. It's the major racing story outside Champions Day of the morning, and it will run as long as the Sunday Times want it to. Wonder if there's part 2.
And you thought Oisin Murphy was going to be the lead.
I cop it when I come in here. Check my word last time. It's like,
was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I picked my weeks.
Right. Okay. The jockeys title then. Before we get on to what Sheikh Farhad had to say to Ed Chamberlain on ITV yesterday, let's talk about the jockeys title in itself, and whether you think it's kind of a satisfactory way of playing it out.
Look, you can look at this various ways. We've had various permutations of the Jockeys Championship. The one thing from should it end on Champions Day? Should it run as it used to the end of the turf season? The one thing I would say about the end of the turf season is I once called that day, and where will Oisin Murphy and William Buick be on November Handicap Day at Doncaster? Well, they'll be at Breeders' Cup. And so as a result, as a spectacle of crowning your champion, they're not even there. It looks a little bit awkward. So I can see why it ends when it does. Rod Street was quite interesting in an interview I did with him last week. He said, it is the PJA's call. If they want anything different, they can do something different. For me, it grates the beginning more than the end, actually. I can see the benefit of crowning on Champions Day. It's often been decided anyway. It's a good spectacle. You are calling them champions. Still sticks in my gut that the Craven doesn't count, or, maybe even from the word go, the Lincoln doesn't count, or that apprentice race at the beginning, which let someone lead the title for half an hour. Easter is a problem. I would have had a winter championship and a summer one, but, Easter this year, for example, is after the Lincoln.
Yeah.
So, if you want to crown your all-weather champion on Good Friday, and what happens when Chelmsford run a couple of turf races in November? They might do. They've got their turf track down now. It might be a nice way of attracting good maidens. Does that count to the all-weather championship? And the Trainers' Championship is on prize money and runs to the end of the year, and the owner's title, and it's all a bit of a mess. But at the end of the day, it is the NTF that decide the trainers. It's the PJA that are going to have a chance, and I gather it is going to be revisited, about the jockeys title.
Right, well, we don't need the next 20 seconds, so let's move straight on, if we can, to Sheikh Farhad, who gave an interesting interview to Ed Chamberlain on ITV yesterday, which I watched when I got home. Ed asked him a series of perfectly reasonable questions about Oisin Murphy's conduct in the week leading up to Champions Day. Sheikh Farhad, I think it's fair to say, was bristling.
Yes, he was dismissive, and I thought a little bit glib, and my only concern is that, if that was my employer, I would feel that, I appreciate the defence of my position, but I may feel that it wasn't as serious as others perhaps in the organisation. It clashed with the David Redvers interview, I thought, the previous day. Now, I'm not asking for lots of mea culpa or what have you, but I did feel that just brushing it off as, red top tabloid was a little bit too dismissive, shall we say. And the other point about this is, what came first, the conduct or the breath test? At the moment, everyone just had the breath test. It was failed, terrible. Then we get the incident that happened the night before. So the question is, was the breath test conducted because of the incident the night before, when under the influence, late at night, it's then highly likely the person involved would be over the limit the following day. And that adds a slightly new dimension, because it's not just someone failing a breath test having sat in their hotel room and, had too much of a bottle of wine. It's actually related to a misconduct incident as well that was in the public domain. So it gathers a little bit more awkwardness.
David Redvers was very much putting an arm around Oisin Murphy, but was playing quite a straight back. Clearly, Sheikh Farhad feels quite wounded by criticism of him on social media and elsewhere. But social media is a bad barometer to use in circumstances like this, because people will always be piling on.
Quietly, if you're being, hard-hatted about it, you'll support your jockey in public, absolutely, 100%. Privately, you'd say, hang on a second, I was being asked on my big racing day, an interview, to sell it, and I was having to talk about you failing a breath test. I don't want that to happen again. If that's behind the scenes what's going on, it's fine. I wasn't 100% convinced that was, based on his interview yesterday, not David Redvers.
Colin Keane is champion jockey in Ireland, and how?
And how? I mean, look, I have to admit, I had to go and check past runnings of this to make sure that I was on, even ground, knowing my knowledge of jockeys' titles. Kevin Blake, I respect very much, has been talking up Colin Keane as someone that we really will be hearing a lot more of in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So I was tracking his progression through the sport, if you like. This is an absolute dominant. His previous titles, he got up to beat Shane Foley, having been 20 behind, I think, with a couple of months to go. This has been an absolute romp, setting records along the way, underpinned by a long-standing relationship with Joe Lyons. Credit to both of them, because you don't get that many of those sort of associations that stand the test of time as well as he has done. There's still a missing dynamic as regards international racegoers, I think, to be aware of what Colin's achieving. Probably why I needed to do so much research. The forays to England, even in this season, haven't been that productive, but that I'm sure will change as he gains wider acceptance on a wider stage. And it's a phenomenal achievement, 126, I think, and counting, winning it by 40 or 50, which is virtually unprecedented for the small number of races that make up their championship. It's unusual to win it by more than 20. He was on the losing end of a protracted battle with Donica O'Brien as well, and he's bounced back.
You can't win those, can you?
Well, no,
you can't win those.
The big guns get put on the lawn, don't they? Really? But even so, you could, he's proved that that was a bruising encounter which short left them knackered. He's come back, and he is the dominant force jockey-wise in Irish flat racing, and I look forward to seeing him more, on the international stage, I think.
It looks as though Frankel's going to be the champion sire, the first British-based champion sire since Mill Reef. Is that right?
I think that might be right. Yes. Big fight with Galileo going. The way is open. Who is going to be the best son? And it's interesting that Juddmonte appeared to have got the head start, if you like.
He's definitely the best son, isn't he? There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
best sire. But yes, I think it's an interesting, because Coolmore are aware, they're very sure-footed, as you know, and you can see the diversification from their side with the Wootton Bassets, etc., that's going to receive a lot of support. But for the next few years, it's hard to escape the Frankel domination. And we were talking earlier about the importance of having a sire to keep your momentum in bloodstock. Juddmonte, of course, suffered the same fate with the passing of Khalid Abdullah, but their momentum at the sales has been far more significant, hasn't it? In Book 1, they were still bidding, I mean, you'd know more than me on this.
Well, I thought the interesting point was that Juddmonte and Cheveley Park, so Juddmonte and
of course,
Patricia Thompson, were bidding against each other for a blue-blooded filly at one point. And that, I thought, well, that's quite encouraging, really, for the
absolutely.
sport.
And, it'll be underpinned by the ability of Frankel, obviously, to remain at the top of those charts. So it's very, very unusual. I mean, I know you get sent the best bloodstock, but it's a very, breed the best to the best and all of that, but it's still an imprecise science. And considering the chances of him being dominant in 2 spheres, fantastic achievement, really.
And as we move into the next point about the Shadwell dispersal, when I was in Keeneland last week, there were 2 races that have habitually been sponsored by those 2 operations. You still had the Juddmonte Spinster and their boss in America, Garrett O'Rourke, coming out and saying, we are absolutely 100% committed to continuing in the sport. It used to be the Shadwell Turf Mile. Last weekend it was the Keeneland Turf Mile, which probably tells its own story.
Yes. I was inquiring as to, I saw in the week, posted on social media, an extremely unusual scenario of a horse in Sheikh Hamdan's colours, Shadwell's colours, running for Saeed bin Sarur, and told that it was, that they being put back in their own colours because there's not going to be that many running after Saturday. They're being vetted for the dispersal sale. We haven't seen the catalogue yet. I probably hadn't underestimated how many horses they have in training and hence how big the cutbacks might be. As you say, they'll still be representing the big races because the cream of the current crops are there and you can carry on racing the cream. The difficulty is going to be what comes through to replace them when they either curdle or head off to stud, one or the other. And you do often need a big population, a big presence, a big profile. But he could be the saviour for them. If they stand him, breed him with a significant number of their own mares and he becomes like Frankel,
and they start buying mares to put to him, so,
yes.
Like
yes.
Juddmonte have done this week.
Yes, but at the moment you would be slightly more... Juddmonte has taken a step forward based on their activities this week, in our view, for longevity. Fair?
Yeah, for longevity.
Yeah.
Even though they have far fewer yearlings going into training, particularly in Great Britain. I think from a breeding side of it, commercial side of it, they're still...
We're probably a year off seeing whether that's the same for Shadwell.
Yeah.
This time next year. Are you buying any mares from Book 1?
But what you've got is Shaker Hisser's genuine love and enthusiasm for the game yoked to commercial potential with the likes of Baid and Ishada.
Yes, what I don't know is in the dynamics of, royal families within the Dubai structure, how much clout you have, the ability to generate the finance that is clearly needed to support such an operation. And I'm sure Sheikh Hisser will be doing all she can to do so, but whether or not economics will over-trump that, I don't know.
Economics have over-trumped the ability to keep Poetic Flair in training as a 4-year-old, or indeed to secure a place for him at stud in Ireland or Europe, because Jim Bolger has, well, sort of to paraphrase him, sort of almost been forced to sell the horse to stud in Japan to sort of maximise his sort of commercial potential.
Normally I'd be sitting here saying, another 3-year-old packed off to stud, but I think it's pretty harsh on Poetic Flair because of the aggressive campaigning that Jim managed during the course of his 3-year-old days, really. He turned up regularly in all those hard races, back-to-back, all of those guineas, then produced at Royal Ascot. You can say, what do you have left to achieve? And Jim is very commercially savvy as well, and he will be well aware of the importance of, Poetic Flair maximising his potential. Where would he run next year, etc.? Would that campaign leave its mark? So I can completely understand the decision, and I'm less antsy about it than I might be if you just only had 2 or 3 runs and you felt you had been scratching the surface. I think Poetic Flair was seen sufficiently regularly in that early part of the season.
As if we didn't know it already, and we saw it with the acquisition of Derby winner after Derby winner after Derby winner and Sunday Silence and others in the late 80s, 90s into the early noughties, which is in the last year we've had Lucky Vega, Poetic Flair and Siskin, all top-class milers heading to Japan. So they're, putting as many strings to their bow as they possibly can.
Yes, and that's interesting. There was a period, I think, in the late 90s when they first rose on the scene when Pilsudski was retired there, and there were plenty, I think Mike Muzzle went there, and there were others that seemed that they were dominating that area. We do need to be aware of the potential flow of talent. Equine, leaving our shores off the back of Book 1s and going to overseas jurisdictions, particularly America, we seem to be beefing up their turf horses. But it does tend to also be cyclical, and, Japan is the market. If you're a seller, you want to sell into the best market. And if that's Japan at the moment, then, fair play to Jim. He's campaigned Poetic Flair aggressively and hopefully has got commercial benefit at the end of it. You can't ask more than that, I don't think.
Those were this week's talking points.